It is 9:02. I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order. If you have a phone on you, if you'd please place it on either silent or vibrate during the proceedings. I'm going to call the meeting to order and establish that a quorum is present. We're going to have Terry lead us in the prayer and pledge.
Most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the day that you've provided in front of us today. Help us to do your will throughout the day and make San Angelo a better place for us all to live. Please be with the city staff as they present all of the documents today and help the Planning Commission be with them to make good decisions for our city and for our individuals that live here and work here. Please forgive us of our sins and help us in our daily lives. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Consent agenda. The commission may request for a consent agenda item to be moved to the regular agenda for presentation and public comment. Otherwise, the consent agenda will be considered in one vote. Consideration of approving the January 28th, 2019 Planning Commission regular minutes.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's going to be 6-0. Regular agenda, text amendments. The council has final authority for approval of text amendments. Public hearing and consideration of a text amendment to Chapter 12, Exhibit A, zoning ordinances.
Travis, I'm sorry, I think you may be reading the minutes maybe or something else. Do you have the agenda?
We had a request to move that item to the first of the agenda, and so had done that. And then
I was looking at an old schedule, guys. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, so it's been changed. No problem. Moving on. Get that one out of the way so I don't do it again. Okay, regular agenda, subdivision plats. Planning Commission has final authority for approval. Appeals may be directed to City Council. Replat of Tract 8, revised Pecan Creek subdivision. Public hearing consideration of a request for approval of a replat of Tract 8, Pecan Creek subdivision, and two variances. A variance from Section 10-3A1 of the Land Development Subdivision Ordinance to allow a 50-foot right-of-way in lieu of the required 60 feet. And B, a variance from Section 10-3A2 of the Land Development and Subdivision Ordinance to maintain a minimum paving width of 19.2 feet in lieu of 30 feet for Reese Road, a rural local street, being 76.22 acres located at 1382 Reese Road.
Good morning, Commissioners. Hillary Bucher, Senior Planner. We're going to look first at Pecan Creek subdivision. This is a replat of Tract 8, and I'm sorry for the typo, but it is actually 46.22 acres, so close to 50 acres, west of US 277 and Reese Road. So you can see the intersection here of South Highway 277. This is a proposed replat of a previously platted tract being replatted into 8 lots, and they're seeking variances from the right-of-way width that is 50 feet in lieu of the required 60, and the pavement width to remain the 19.2 feet in lieu of the required 30. So you can see it's a fairly long track. There's a creek here. The existing home is in the back here. They're replatting out 8 lots, 7 along the frontage, and then 1 flag. So staff is recommending approval of the plat. The larger lots will maintain the rural qualities of the area. It's consistent with the existing development in the county. The additional lots will accommodate new residential development, and it's consistent with the surrounding overall development. Staff is also recommending approval of the variance from Chapter 10-3A1. The property is surrounded by previously platted lots utilizing the 50-foot right-of-way, so we believe that it'll be consistent with the surrounding area. The previously approved plats were approved by Tom Green County in the early 2000s, so at the time, the city was not approving these plats. The existing right-of-way will service the surrounding area satisfactorily, and the existing right-of-way will pose no safety risk to the public. Staff is recommending denial, though, of the variance from 10-3A2. The road does not meet the minimum pavement widths that are established in the land subdivision ordinance. So the land subdivision ordinance says in no instance shall we have a road that is under 26 feet wide. So it does not support the minimum width of 19.2. As the larger lots to the north re-subdivide over time, the incremental width could be required as they go along. So the whole north side of Reese Road is larger parcels, around 50 acres. So as those re-subdivide in the future, if they do, this road could be incrementally improved as we go along. The existing street is again below the standard that could pose a safety risk to the public per the land subdivision ordinance. So staff is recommending approval of the replat, Tract 8, Pecan Creek subdivision, and approval of the variance for the right-of-way, Chapter 10-3A1, and denial of the variance from Chapter 10-3A2, subject to 7 conditions of approval. I'm going to go over this. These are kind of summary conditions. So they need a copy of their tax certificate. They need to revise the signature block to have the accurate signatures on there. Provide a 50-foot unobstructed access easement to Lot 8. If you'll bear with me, I want to show you real quick what we are talking about there. So if this Tract 8A were to ever further subdivide, they would need some sort of road to go back into that back area. So staff is recommending a 50-foot wide access easement to go along this edge. So it would encumber 25 feet of Lot A's property and 25 feet of Lot 8B's property. That way, if they ever did subdivide, there would be no construction in that area. Again, we're not requiring the road today, just trying to help plan for the future if that parcel ever does further subdivide.
I'm sorry, could you go back to that?
Yes, sir. So the county requirements for addressing only require large lots over 2 acres have a 25-foot frontage along Reese Road for addressing purposes. So they've gone with the minimums here, which is okay per our land subdivision ordinance. The concern is if, let's just say, you can see some of the surrounding development here in dashed lines. Let's say someday there's a road and some lots in here. We're only going to have 25 feet that's associated with this 8A. So what staff is recommending is just today creating an easement right here that just goes to the back of Lot 8B to ensure that nothing is ever built in that 50 feet if they do move forward with subdividing in the future. Again, it doesn't require a right-of-way today. It's just an unobstructed access easement today.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. They have to seek approval for their septic permits with Tom Green County, provide confirmation of water service from Concho Rural Water Corporation, dedicate the right-of-way along Reese Road or seek the variance, and improve Reese Road, provide a financial guarantee or seek the variance, which again, 6 and 7, they have asked for the variances on. Does anyone have any questions?
So going back to that plat, the plat that's proposed, did you say it has a 25-foot right-of-way?
So right now, Reese Road has 50 foot, but this big lot back here
Yes.
only has a 25-foot piece along here that goes to Reese Road, and that is what's required per the county's addressing standards. So they have a 25-foot piece. If you're under 2 acres, which this parcel is, then you have to have 50 foot. So total here is 75 foot for 8A and 8B.
Okay.
Frontage along Reese.
Okay. Anyone have questions? All right. Thank you, Hillary.
Yes, sir.
Open it up for public comment. Anyone wishes to speak on this case, please come forward. State your name.
Morning, I'm Darren Fentress. I'm the engineer working with the surveyors and landowner to get this platted. I would like to see approval of the variance on the road width. That road's been the same width for decades. When the people on the south side of the road developed their property, they weren't required to expand their half of the road. So I don't think it's quite fair that we require my client to do that now.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this case? Darren, if you have a second, I do have a question for you. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
So in the city's, in the staff's recommendations, they've asked for a 50-foot right-of-way for that extra parcel on the back,
Right, an easement.
an easement.
Yes, sir.
Do you object to
No,
doing
sir.
that for the?
No,
for
sir,
the
and I don't
larger
believe the
tract?
clients will have an issue with putting an overlay easement on, an access easement over that. I don't think
Okay.
that'll be an issue.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Anyone have any thoughts or ideas, discussion about this case?
Color from the city's perspective on what Darren brought up, right? So what's the difference between what has gone on in that particular area versus what we're trying to do now as far as
The pavement width. Yes, sir. So the previously approved plats that are south of Reese Road were approved by Tom Green County in the early 2000s. And I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of history about when that switched to the ETJ and how that all worked. We may have more information, but the plats were approved by the county. So my assumption is that they either sought a variance or the county did not require it. Because this is now in the city's ETJ and under the subdivision ordinance control, we are simply stating what's in our subdivision ordinance today. But those plats that are south were approved by the county in the early 2000s.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Hillary.
The ETJ is 3 miles or 5 miles?
3.5 miles.
3.5 miles?
Yes, ma'am. And this this property is close to the edge. I mean, it is at the. We're quite a ways out for this. Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Okay. Anyone wish to make a motion?
I make the motion to approve as proposed.
We have a motion and a second to approve as proposed by the city staff. All in favor, say aye.
Okay,
question.
could I get a clarification? I guess I understood the motion to be as proposed by the applicant, but if
By
we,
city staff.
okay,
I
staff's
make the motion
recommendation.
to approve as proposed by city staff.
We have a motion and a second to approve as proposed by the city staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, is that 5-1? Okay. All right. Item 2 is rezoning. City Council has final authority for approval of rezonings. Z 19-01, Aguero. It's also PD 19-03. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a rezoning from the single-family residential zoning district to the planned development zoning district with an underlying single-family residential zoning with a minimum floor area ratio of 50% to allow larger single-family homes on individual lots located west of Tarrant Street, north of Twin Mountain Drive, on 3.353 acres, unaddressed tract described by deed and record and recorded as instrument number 616893 OPR, Tom Green County, Texas.
Good morning, Commissioners. Sherry Bailey. I will be addressing both this applicant's request and the one to follow, the zoning change to follow. Just to refresh your memory, this originally came before you last month as zoning 1901. At that time, the applicant was requesting a rezoning from single-family residential 1 to single-family, or to two-family residential. There was a lot of discussion at that time because the only real reason the applicant was requesting that was because of the larger floor area ratio that he really needed for his single-family homes. He had already platted the property, and the lot size would only accommodate those single-family homes, and that's what he wanted. In the discussion, the suggestion was that rather than go that direction, that he come back as a planned development with the underlying zoning of single-family, but to have the larger floor area ratio. And so that's what he is requesting at this time. Just to remind you, the future land use has this area as neighborhoods, so it accommodates both the single-family and the two-family. That's why we originally brought it forward as two-family. This is the property to the north. A number of those homes had already received administrative variance for that larger floor area ratio, and those on the right of your screen in yellow are the ones that have received that. We sent out 45 notices. However, this morning I had a opposition notice, and I believe I've laid it out in front of you. In reading through that, I think the applicant is concerned mainly about having a two-story which overlooks their property, and that's an allowed use in single-family and two-family. So other than that, we did not receive any other objections. We believe that as it's coming before you now, as the planned development with that larger floor area ratio, there will be really no impacts on the general area, and it meets all of the zoning requirements. And as such, staff is recommending approval of the planned development with the underlying single-family zoning and the larger floor area ratio. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Sherry. No one has questions for the staff, so I'm going to open it up for public comment. If you wish to speak on this case, please state your name.
Hello, my name is Austin Aguero. I'm here representing Sierra Vista Construction, the applicant in this matter. I just want to kind of review things as she mentioned. We are here primarily to continue what we have done in the previous two sections of this three-section plat. We're trying to build slightly larger homes on the lots that we have currently designed and platted. A lot of the previous lots were administratively adjusted to receive the same privileges that we're trying to get here. There's really no other impacts that you'll see, not cosmetic from elevations from the street view. You can't even really notice it from the sky if you were to do a aerial view. There's not going to be much of a change here at all. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin.
Is this property the same as this?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, is Sarah Carr here? She sent us a letter, and inside the letter it says, what exactly does the builder want to build on this property? I was wondering if you could come back and let's just get it on the record for Ms. Carr. what exactly do you want to build on this property?
It's really just slightly larger single-family residences. We don't really have a exact floor plan in mind, but what more of the same of what we've done in the previous two sections. It's
So when it gets to two-story, I think this is what her problem is she thinks that the floor plan will change, which will make it possible to have two-story on this, on a single lot. And she's
Plan-
worried that people are gonna see in her backyard.
The planned development is not gonna change that. That's allowed in RS1 or
I'm just trying
RS2.
to be transparent and make sure that,
I mean, we really don't have any intention on changing and going to two-story homes. The only thing we've ever received from customers is the possibility of bonus rooms. Now, if that's something that you guys wanted to change, I mean, we'd be open to that. We're just trying to kind of keep our options open as much as we can for our customer.
I was just asking for Sarah Carr. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Austin. Anyone else wish to speak on this case? Okay, I'm going to close public comment.
I move to approve as presented.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve as presented by the city staff. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? 6-0. Z 19-02 Vasquez. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a rezoning from the single-family residential zoning district to the general commercial zoning district located northwest of Lowry Avenue and La Follette Street, being lots 37, 38, 39, and 40 in Block 13 of the Avondale Edition. Sherry?
Before you is a request to rezone it from those 4 lots as we've identified them on here. They're presently zoned. Sorry about that, I can't grow. They are presently zoned single family. That entire area around here is zoned single family. However, directly across from these lots is the Houston Hart Expressway. And most of the area around there, as you can see from the aerial, has not developed. The applicant is requesting to go to general commercial. His intent is to build a storage unit for personal use and eventually to sell it for some retail type of use. The future land use has that as commercial with a transition zone on the property to the north and then the neighborhood going further north. And the present zoning, as I indicated, was single family. The property on the left, the picture on the left, is the property on the corner. You can see the residential development to the rear. The property on the right is a picture standing on the corner looking at the Houston Hart Expressway. This is looking straight down, looking west at the property that has not developed on the rest of that block. The nearest residential on that front part of the block is clear at the end of the block. Across the street from this property, there is a trailer home and it is inhabited. We sent out 11 notifications. We did receive on Friday a letter that was in opposition. That is what I handed out to you because we had already sent out the staff report to the Planning Commission. And I believe that person who has submitted that is present. In looking at all of the rationale for approval, since the future land use considered this area as commercial, the appropriate growth and best use of property as commercial, we feel that it is incompatible with what he's requesting, And in looking at all of the impacts on the surrounding property, as I indicated, the nearest residential is to the north and down to the west, and there's commercial further beyond that. The development patterns in this area are somewhat complicated. There's a large off-ramp from Houston Hart, but that goes to the west, and you cannot easily come back. But there is a lot of flow of from traffic that occurs moving to the west in front of this property. When I was there for about a half an hour to take pictures, I counted about 11 cars that were passing and moving. In looking at all of the intended use of the property, what the applicant wants to use the property for, and the future growth of that property, staff is recommending approval to general commercial. Are there any questions?
I think we're good. Thank you. I open this up for public comment. If you wish to speak on this case, please come forward and state your name.
My name is Sharon Urena, and I live in the mobile home right across the street. And I don't feel like that they should do that because it's going to cause more crime in our neighborhood. Most of the neighborhood is senior. It's going to cause a lot of traffic and congestion and stuff. And as she said, there's no way to get to it unless they go through the neighborhood to get to it. There's no off-ramp. It's past it, and you can't come back because that's a one-way road. It's going to cause the taxes to go up, and if y'all approve it, I'm going to have to nail down everything I own. I would rather not have it. That's all I can say. It's just the peace and quiet that we have there is really nice. And I have more property than he does. And I like it. I like my peace and quiet. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can you bring the map back up?
Could you bring the map back up? I'm assuming the larger overview, if it's available. Go back a few more. Right there.
So there won't be a curb cut on the saw. The curb cut would be, proposed curb cut would be on the by street, side street.
It would actually be on Lowry, I believe is the intended curb cut.
The side street.
Side street.
Okay.
Got the proponent here too.
Sorry?
And requesting.
Yes, sir.
Victor Vasquez, I'm the applicant on this project. My intentions currently are to build a storage unit. I would have requested eventually curb cuts onto Lowry Street. The building itself, for all intentions, is to store my tractor, my trailers, so there's not going to be much traffic, in there. It's just a storage unit. As far as crime, I don't know if it probably will be a safer neighborhood. As a retired police officer, I'm going to have my friends going by there and looking at that place. It's my investment, and I think yes, hopefully they will do a lot more patrolling down there. That's all my intentions are. Currently, at this point, it's a storage unit, but I am gonna build the building for also possible future retail business. That's what it is, or that's what I'm requesting it to do, is change to commercial.
Thank you, sir. Okay, anyone else wish to speak on this case? I'm going to close public comment. Up here have thoughts or opinions or want to make a motion?
So, Sherry, I have a question for you. So general commercial is the required zoning for storage, is that correct?
Yes, it actually allows personal storage and it allows storage units.
Okay.
Miss Urena, does it make you feel better that now that you know what's going to be on the property?
Okay. Anyone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to to accept as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as presented by the city staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 6-0. All right. Sign variance. Planning Commission has final authority for approval of sign variances. Appeals may be directed to City Council. SV 19-01, Angelo Christian Ministries. Public hearing and consideration of a request to approve a freestanding on-site sign with a minimum sign height of 50 feet in lieu of the maximum 25 feet in the CN zoning district, a maximum sign area of 250 square feet in lieu of the maximum 150 feet, 1.5 times the linear street frontage, and C, a minimum 75-foot setback to a residential lot in lieu of the required 100 feet, located at 3102 Dallas Street and 3105 West Houston Hart Expressway. Mr. Fisher.
Morning, Planning Commissioners. Jeff Fisher, Senior Planner. This case today, SV 1901 for Angelo Christian Ministries. The applicant had approached us recently. They own several properties, but these two in particular are zoned neighborhood commercial. They wanted to put up a freestanding sign. So this would be a request to allow an on-site freestanding sign at these two properties. The sign's going to actually be on the smaller one over here. 3 variances are required today. The first one is to allow a sign area of 250 square feet. The linear frontage of these properties is only 100, and so the sign ordinance requires you can go up to 1.5 times that frontage, which would be 150. So the first variance is to increase from 150 to 250. The second variance is to increase the sign height. In the CN zoning, the maximum height is 25 feet for a freestanding sign. They want to go to 50 feet to allow more visibility. The church also owns several properties, including the large TLC church to the southwest, as well as most of this block here and some of these triangles. And the third variance is to allow a reduced setback from a residential lot. You have to be 100 feet away because this is all zoned RS1, and this is RS1, and this is only 100 feet wide. They obviously couldn't make that. So those are your 3 variances today. District 5, Lane Carter, and it's in the Bluffs neighborhood. The future land use is transitional, and there's the zoning, as you can see, CN, and so it's surrounded by residential zoning at this time. As an unrelated case, the applicant has made a request as of Friday afternoon for a rezoning of several of the blocks, including this one into the south for CG. One of the smaller blocks would be CO. That was just received. But again, that's independent of this case. We're just focusing on it in the context of the current CN zoning. This is looking east and west, and that's the sign rendering that they submitted. So it'd be a 50-foot sign is what we're looking at today. And this is if you're going east along Houston Hart Expressway. This is south at the property. As I understand, this small building here serves as a church office. and also has some administrative prayer service as well for administrative staff. This is the larger building on a separate property where the church and the school is as you go further southwest. The applicant had provided us with the following photos, and they'll be here in a few minutes to answer any questions you have, but staff, myself, had also driven out there, and it's clear that a 25-foot sign is not going to be as visible if you go eastbound or westbound as a 50-foot sign if you're coming along the highway. There is a point, especially if you're coming westbound, that I found where you're going to have a good view of it at a certain point, but otherwise, especially if you're coming eastbound, that large bridge and drop-off does make it hard to see. And that's the pictures they've provided going westbound. So, 50-foot tall sign, and there are the two setbacks. So the shortest one is a 75-foot setback from a residential lot, so that requires the third variance. And the sign will be, as I mentioned, 250 square feet, 20 by 10, and then that small part at the bottom. So for you all to approve a variance, we haven't had one in a few years for a sign variance. You have to establish first that there's a practical difficulty or a hardship. If you believe there's a hardship, then we go, and then they still have to meet the 5 criteria. So hardship looks at the size, shape, or dimensions of structure, location, any topographical features, or other physical limitations. So staff does not believe there's a hardship unique to this property because all of the other properties along Houston Hart would also be subject to the same standards, as well as the topography is relatively flat wherever you go along there. The applicant was given the opportunity to rezone the property to a PD or a CG. They have done that now, but that's separate, and that could take several more months to get to council. So again, we have to evaluate it on the current context, which is CN. We don't believe that it meets for a variance for CN. So staff's rationale for approval in this case is to deny. We don't believe there's a special circumstance. Other properties, as I've mentioned, along Houston Hart are subject to the same concerns. The sign standards all relate to one of the things, the purpose of the sign ordinance in the very beginning talks about conformity with the intent of purpose statements. And so when you look at the zoning ordinance, the intent of purpose statement for a CN zoning is really small-scale commercial, and so that's why the CN only allows 25 feet. If they choose to go to CG and then they were to come back, it's possible, based on a 50-foot sign there, you're more large-scale commercial. A lot of those properties over time remained RS1 or CN along the highway. Some of them were CG, but these ones were not. So again, we had to evaluate what we saw. The rezoning to CG or PD would be the minimum action necessary. We believe that essentially this is just the wrong recourse, that rezoning would do the fix, and so a variance would not be the best recourse in this situation. The other concern, of course, is a negative precedent. If we continue to allow variances rather than a rezoning, you could have a lot of 50-foot signs there in the wrong zoning district. So staff recommendation is to deny the sign variance of the sign ordinance for all three: denial of the height variance, the sign area variance, and the setback. This concludes staff's presentation. Any questions or comments at this point?
Anyone have questions for Jeff?
Knowing that they're going to request the rezoning, why are they trying to push this through without just waiting?
The applicant's here to probably address that in further detail. My understanding in original conversation was that if they choose to have an event, for example, Easter's coming up or some other things in the meantime, this would get them through faster. The rezoning would take another several months.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. We're going to open it up for public comment. Please state your name when you start.
I'm Pastor Don Crabtree. I'm here on behalf of Dr. Walt Landers, pastor of the Life Church, and I have our engineer present and our lawyer, and I have also we have prepared some documentation for the members.
Okay.
Good morning, Russell Gully with SKG Engineering, here to speak on behalf of Angelo Christian Ministries and the Life Church. We've been working with staff sometime through this, and we appreciate their time and effort helping us to work through a solution on this. And I guess I'll just step out, Ryan, right quick and try to address your question. And Jeff did a great job of doing that, but it's really a timing issue. With Easter coming up and the time that it would take to go through a full-on zone change would kind of push us beyond really the focus. The sign will be there for more than just Easter, but that was kind of the intent. Let's get it up for that. But so the zone change will effectively address all of the variances, and so we wouldn't be here today had this be a CG zoning district. So want to address some of staff's comments and concerns. We believe we do meet the variance criteria, specifically the elevations. Although the terrain of the land is flat, the elevation of Loop 306, Houston Hart, whatever you want to call it, kind of transitions from being down depressed to where you're below grade. And if you look in the packet of information, and I'm sure y'all all have driven along that segment of Houston Hart there, you know, at one stage you're up elevated above at an overpass, the next time you're down below, kind of below grade. So as Jeff alluded to, visibility of the sign from the highway is kind of fleeting at best. There is one moment in time you could have a snapshot of it at 25 feet, but beyond that, you're very, very limited. And just having a sign on the frontage road, that's not really the audience or the traffic that you're trying to capture and make note of the sign there. So the applicant did not have any control or anything to do with the elevations and the placement of the overpasses. So we certainly did not create the conditions and the special circumstances that really, I guess, TxDOT did whenever they put the overpasses there. And then also with the creation and the land taking of the lots there, they kind of severed some of these lots. There's some remnant pieces along there, especially kind of to the east. And so I don't know how we would flip back to, that would show the site plan. Jeff, can you get us? There you go, thank you. So as Jeff alluded to, the church owns the land, I guess, both to the east and the west, and both of those blocks are part of the zone change that has been submitted. So when you bring that together, this all being a CG zoning, which this staff report says that staff believes that they will support such a zone change, and the transitional zoning is suited for a CG zoning. So we believe that a CG zoning is certainly suitable for this location. So that would tend to address all of this. The elevation of the sign is not necessarily negative. If you elevate it to 50 feet, it would actually kind of be getting it elevated above. If it did remain residential, you know, a sign down lower could pose more of a visual obstruction than if it was up elevated high. So really an elevation up to 50 feet, if this area was to remain residential, which will be coming for a zone change, the elevation would actually help the situation if a residence was to go there, which is not going to be very likely. The lots to the east, because of the way they've been severed, are too small for really any kind of development, so they're just kind of tied in to this area. And then and also in the staff's report, they speak about in condition 4 that it would provide greater viewship of the sign, and that the underpass does pose those visual obstructions there. There again, supporting the variance request. So really just be happy to answer any questions, concerns that you may have on this matter, and any questions about information within the binder that was handed out to you.
I just have a quick question, Russell. So the PD will be coming forth next month. Is that what y'all are proposing?
Or general commercial?
Yes, it's a zone change to a general commercial within this immediate area, and there's a small segment
Okay,
kind
the
of
other one
to
will
the
be the
south and
PD.
west.
Okay, okay.
But
thank
yes,
you.
ma'am, that application was submitted on Friday by the deadline. So yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
On this map, Russell, it looks like there are single-family lots. That'd be, what, to the west of the site here where the arrows are?
Yes, sir.
Does the Life Church own all of that lot, all of that block, I mean?
Yes, they own this entire block here and that one, plus the ones even further to the west.
Okay, what about to the north of that arrow there? Those partial lots on the front edge? Yes, sir.
Yes, they own that as well. Yes, absolutely. And the church has some long-range plans and some vision kind of for this area. So this property is going to be coming before you for some other stuff, most likely in the future. We may be asking for some alley abandonments, some replatting, some street abandonments. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and we would have come sooner with the zone change, but it was really just trying. There's so many things kind of up in the air for the church. They just felt like if we could get this variance for the sign, that allows us the time to kind of, things with churches don't move terribly fast, rightfully so, with a lot of prayer and thought is how they move through things. So really that's kind of how we've evolved at this. But yes, sir, there's going to be development associated with the church occurring along this corridor.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for Russell?
Okay, or of the church, they're here to answer any questions as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. So just to clarify, if this is rezoned to general commercial, as has been indicated, they've done so. They go through that process. Is the sign that they're proposing allowed under the general commercial zoning?
An on-site freestanding sign of those dimensions would be allowed.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? We still have public comment open, so if there's anyone else that wishes to speak on this case, if you'd please come forward at this time.
Again, for the record, I'm Pastor Don Crabtree, and I'm here on behalf of Pastor Walt Landers, who is out of the country. Wish that he could be here for this proceeding. The church does own the property, as you see, both to the east and the west, or my compass is a little off, but the little triangle that is this touchscreen, yeah, we own this. We also own this, and if you'll refer to the map that's in the notebook, please. We have our proposal for zone change that designates blocks 77, partial block of 69, all of 78, and then the little triangle that I indicated, and also block 86. And our zone change proposal, which is not being considered today, would take in all of those blocks that we own. And as Mr. Goley has stated, there's so many moving parts here. We've been working closely with Jeff and his staff and trying to figure out the best way to make this happen. The PD was not something that we could consider at this point because we have these moving parts. We do intend to go forward with the zoning change to both CG and at the recommendation of Jeff's staff, the CO on Block 86. And we are in negotiation for some other properties in the neighborhood, and we just at this point are not able to lock in a complete PD, but our hope is to be able to go to the CG and CO zoning changes. Hardships, if you will refer also in your notebook there that we've provided for you, we have pictures of both the underpass that goes below Glenna, and that's the one the second one actually. You can see clearly that even though we do have a relative flat surface there in front of the house that is in this CN zoning, that's only from the frontage road. Anybody that passes by there knows that you have great height variances both underneath Glenna and also coming from the west over, the name escapes me, Garfield. And so we've provided those pictures to show that even though the terrain is relatively flat there in front of the actual sign site, that really has no bearing on travel both east and west. And again, we had the pictures up. I don't know how to get back to those, but it is an extreme hardship. If we could go back where these two. This shows eastbound at 25 feet, and obviously we had a crane that was there. Michael Martinez is here from Fast Signs, and he sent his crew out. They will be doing the work if this is approved. They sent a crew out, and we had a white sign attached to the crane at 25 and 50, and then our IT staff at the church went back and just highlighted in green so that you could see here today what we're dealing with. The distance traveling both east and west of the visibility of the sign is very obvious. It's very clear, and the hardship is certainly, as Mr. Goley has stated, the hardship is definitely caused by DOT. We don't fault them today. We're just asking that this committee would consider our appeal for variance on these issues. One of the reasons we're asking for variance is because of obviously the season. Easter's coming up. As all of you know, the Life Church, formerly Tree of Life Church, has had a huge presence in this city, particularly at Easter, doing Easter Fest and a number of activities. And our hardship at this point, not only are we needing help for the height of our sign, but we're also kind of under the gun on scheduling. We need to get this thing up. We've been working on it for quite some time. We have a very hefty investment on the sign, and we just are asking for your help today to be able to get this variance approved and get our sign permit finished up and get rolling on this project. Thank you for your time.
I have a question. So to raise the sign 25 feet is purely for Easter?
No. Obviously, we will be having events throughout time. So Easter is our pressing issue at the moment. Again, we're addressing with a zone change all of these issues that would obviously make the sign variance go away. But we are pressed at this point first of all, to get our investment out of the garage and get it in the air. That's what we purchased the sign for. But we have Easter coming up, and we do have several large events that are planned for Easter season. And unfortunately, due to the footprint of the actual sign, the actual church building that is in Block 1, due to the footprint, the visibility of the building itself, it's the former Barry's building, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It's just behind the fire station there on TLC Way, which formerly was Barry's, Barry Street, I think they called it. And so we just don't have visibility. We have a large sign on the west side of the building, but you can't see it from the highway at all. And so all we're looking for is to be able to make our property and our purpose more visible to the public, obviously with many spiritual reasons that are involved here, and also for the welfare and the good of our community.
Am I to understand, though, that they could get the sign change with, it would come with the zone change?
If this was zoned CG, then this sign would be approved. We wouldn't be talking about it if they had rezoned the lots, but that takes longer than requesting this variance. Is that?
That's correct. And
that's
also,
why we're talking about it today.
Yes, and also, in all fairness, Mr. Jeff and his team, they're working with us to try to get a PD, and PD just is not in the works for us at this point. We are in a transitional zone, and all we're asking is, just a variance today that would allow us to go forward with our plans while we're working on these issues. There are multiple moving parts to this, and it's going to be difficult for us to lock into a PD, but we are working toward the zone change, and then hopefully, as Mr. Gully stated, there's alleyways that need to be abandoned. There's the possibility of some abandonment on a block, at least, of Dallas. There's multiple moving parts, and again, we're also in negotiation to try to purchase another 2 acres to the east of us. And so we're just asking for consideration for our variance today so that we can get this thing out of the warehouse and get it in the air.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, anyone else wish to speak on this case, please come forward. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Michael Martinez on behalf of Fast Signs, and I just want to reaffirm the kind of deadline and timeline they were looking at. They didn't place this order with us until the 30th of December, and it wasn't until January 13th or 14th that we figured out there was going to be an issue. So that's why the zoning change has been requested. Just, it's not something we've been working on for a year and a half. It's just trying to hit Easter weekend for them and give them, 30 days to market and advertise that. But like I said, the zone change will absolutely satisfy all the variances that they're requiring. And then the other part is just reaffirming what Mr. Goley said. LEDs are directional lighting. They're not wash lighting like we're experiencing right now with fluorescence above us. So the higher we do get that sign, the more it gets that light above households and roof lines. So it doesn't become a situation where we had like 6-7 years ago where there was an LED sign that was right in front of someone's front living room. And so that's the other thing. And the other thing is technology has improved. Probably each year it doubles in its efficiency and effectiveness, to where now we can control the intensity of light, where right now we probably run signs at only 10 to 15% intensity at nighttime, and probably an 80 to 85% over 100% sunlight. So even with that, that's all automated, and even we can go in there and manually change that, even if it's still too bright for them. Because at the end of the day, for us, a big bright sign at night is not what you want. A big bright sign at night is a big bright light. It's not a message, it's not clarity. So the more that we can control the intensity and make sure that we're not a nuisance to those residences around them, we'll do that so that we can make sure that we're a good, clear sign. So that's it.
Thank you, Michael. All right, anyone else wish to speak on this case? We're going to close public comment. Anyone have any thoughts or
I
wish
would
to make a motion?
like to make a motion to approve as requested. Approving as the request was written.
Commissioners, I had created a slide in the event you wish to approve of putting some conditions of approval, and it's really just the one that, and that, I guess that ties into what Mr. Martinez said about no spillover glare or illumination, and that as a note, they obtain a sign permit. So if it was approved, it would be subject to that one condition.
Okay. No, I am saying to approve as it was requested by the proponent.
So with no conditions?
With condition number 1. Yeah, and that's adjustable with the sign as per fast sign.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the sign, subject to the condition of no spillover, glare, or illumination onto adjacent properties. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so it's going to be 4-2. All right. Right-of-way abandonment. City Council has final authority for approval of the vacation and abandoning of public right-of-ways. Alley right-of-way abandonment, Johnson. Public hearing and consideration of a request to approve the abandonment and vacation of all public alleys comprising .267 acres, which is 12,030 square feet within Block 15 of Mill Spa Addition, generally located north of West Washington Drive, west of South Chadburn Street, south of Santa Fe Depot, and east of South Irving Street.
All right, Commissioners, next we're moving on to the alley abandonment. Again, Hillary Bucher, Senior Planner. We're looking at .267 acres, and again, he gave the directions, but it's north of Washington, west of South Chadburn, east of South Irving, and south of the depot. The request is to abandon the public alleys. This is SMD number 3, Fort Concho neighborhood. Mr. Johnson is actually the owner of 805 South Chadburn, which currently has no direct abutting access to Chadburn Street. The future land use of this area is downtown, and the current zoning is light manufacturing. So we're going to go into a couple of photos here just to give you an idea of the area. There's an old restaurant on the corner of Washington and Chadburn. This is actually 805, so you can see this would be the alley right here. It is currently not maintained for the most part. This is north, so this again 805, and then there's a couple of vacant lots, and then an old gas station at that edge. So you can see here, this is the 805 building, the alley that exists today. And then if you were to go on to South Irving Street, looking down the alley, you can see the remnants of the old tracks there. So I'm assuming this was like a spur off of that to service this building at one time. There's also north-south alleys. One of them is shown here on the left-hand side. It looks towards Santa Fe Depot. And again, the existing alley, I'm sure there's some asphalt under it, but today it's mostly broken up and crushed rock, as you can see the picture on your right. So the original plat was recorded in 1888, and you can see the alleys that were proposed at the time. Subsequently, the railroad came in and took their right-of-way out of a portion of it. So today, Mr. Johnson has provided us with a survey of 805 South Chadburn. You can see the old alley here, there's one here, and then the north-south one. Again, this has been divided up with the railroad right-of-way. So staff is recommending approval of abandoning all alleys within this block. There's no negative effects, the unpaved alleys, and there's no access to abutting properties from the rear with these alleys. There are existing water, sewer, and gas utilities in the alley, but one of the conditions is to add an easement atop of this abandonment. Community impact, we have received one response after this was created, but they're in favor. Closing the entire alley would enhance the long-term upkeep and appearance of the space, so each private property owner would be able to keep up their portion. Again, we mailed out 7 notices. We received 1 in favor. I've actually also spoken to number 3, number 4, and then the applicant is number 2. And I think everyone understands what we're doing here today. So staff is recommending approval of the proposed abandonment and vacation of all public alleys within Block 15 of the Mill Spa Addition, subject to the following 5 conditions of approval. They have to pay the assessment for their pieces. We have to record the deeds for the entire alley. Staff would not be supportive of this if we were abandoning a piece or a portion, again, maybe potentially leaving a dead-end section. The subdivision replat encompassing the abandoned alleys has to be recorded within 24 months. So again, absorbing these portions into the lots as they're acquired. They do have to provide a 20-foot unobstructed utility easement, and there has to be a fire apparatus access. So it would be a 20-foot wide fire road. Even if adjacent property owners were to acquire pieces, they would still have to provide access to 805 for fire apparatus. So Mr. Johnson is here, so if you have any questions for him, but staff is recommending approval of these abandonments.
I have a question. Why does the city want to abandon the alley?
We don't see a public benefit at this point, and it would relinquish maintenance to the private property owners. So again, with the utility easement, we would be able to service the utility lines, and the applicant is asking to, abandon them and receive them into part of his property. So.
Okay. Thank you, Hillary.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else have questions for Hillary? All right, we're going to open it up for public comment. Anyone wish to speak on this case, please come forward.
Reason for closing the alley down is to have access. If the property owners on the east side of me build a fence on the back of their property, I have limited access to the property on the north side of my building. And the alleyway would give me a parking space instead of having to go down the alley between the north and south alley. I would have a straight-in shot to the property for parking.
Okay.
I'm limited on the north side because of the railroad track and the caboose and stuff like that for parking down this. The east-west alley, I would have I could fence that off and still have the city to have access to the utilities. If I fence off the north side of my property, then it's hindering the pedestrians for tourists to see the caboose and the railroad tracks. That was the purpose for wanting to shut the alley down.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak on this case, please come forward. All right, we're going to close public comment. Anyone have any thoughts or want to make a motion?
I would make a motion to approve as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0. Text amendment. City Council has final authority for approval of text amendments. Public hearing and consideration of a text amendment to Chapter 12, Exhibit A, Zoning Ordinance, Section 511, Off-Street Parking Standards, and Section 512, Loading Standards, establishing new standards and revisions to existing standards for parking and loading in the city of San Angelo.
Morning, Planning Commission. Jeff Fisher again, Senior Planner. Following text amendment is an amendment to Section 511 and Section 512 of the zoning ordinance. 511 are your current parking standards, and 511 are your current zoning standards. Staff had began research of this late last year. We haven't had any changes to our current parking and loading section since 2004. Nothing else since the original 2000 brought everything in. There were some minor tweaks in 2004, and then with the exception of alternative parking, where the planning director can make some administrative reductions in parking and school parking standards. Pretty much everything else you see is from where it's been since 2004. So we wanted to see, based on our review, to ensure adequate parking for new facilities, look at maybe reducing minimum standards where necessary or increasing them when necessary. Also looking at our maneuvering and paving standards the way they are, and allow for some more flexibility for the public. If they don't meet their parking on site, maybe they can provide parking off-site or nearby. So this is essentially an ongoing process and where we've arrived today. So we first looked at when parking is required, and I've provided you all with handouts of Section 511 as it's currently written. And it's a little complex, so it basically talks about if you're a new or an expanding use, if you're residential or you're non-residential, what the standards are. Some of the interesting or the intricacies here, if you're looking at current parking, basically if you're not increasing the building by more than 25% or the monetary value by more than 50%, you generally do not have to provide parking. And so what's happening is you might get a really large building like a Walmart, and then they expand by less than 25%. They don't have to do something, and then single family dwelling, maybe only 600 square feet, their 25% is going to be a lot more, and then they would have to meet it. So we've tried to, I guess, level the playing field a bit and provide consistency in standards. So quick recap of the changes. So your new building, brand new, nothing's going to change. If you're increasing by up to 25%, I was mentioning you're completely exempt. Now we're proposing parking for the new floor area only, and this is just for non-residential. So, for example, if you're an office, let's say you're an office, you require 6 parking spaces, and now you want to do retail, and it requires 8. So if you're under a 25% expansion, you'd have to add 2 more, the difference between 6 and 8. If you're more than 25%, you would have to provide full parking. The other thing we looked at, and we'll get to in a minute, restaurants that have outdoor entertainment or mini putt or something like that, where they could expand. Right now, unless you're actually pulling a building permit, you don't need to provide parking right now. And that leads to a lot of stormwater, grading, and drainage issues. So if you're expanding the land use on the property, so let's say you're adding another 9 holes of mini golf, or you're adding a huge outdoor patio on your bar, that land area would be calculated, and that would require parking as well, no different than a building. Change of occupancy. Currently, if you're changing your occupancy at all, you have to provide full parking. This one we wanted to ease up a little bit for customers. Often you have sites that are very tight for space, and they just can't meet the parking on the property. So if you're just changing the occupancy up to 25% more than the previous use, again, you're only paving the difference. You don't have to pave all of it. If you're more than 25%, then okay, you would provide full parking. The other exception that we've provided is for single and 2 family dwellings. Again, someone's got an old bungalow that's been there 30 years, and all they want to do is add a very minor garage addition or a bedroom addition. As long as the total square footage of the home doesn't exceed 1,200 square feet, that's sort of roughly the size of a single-family home in San Angelo, give or take. They would not be subject to the parking. If they're more than that, they'd have to provide the parking. So those are a quick overview of the changes. The other thing that we wanted to bring in, and I talked a minute ago about people coming in and not needing a building permit. Right now, if you build a building in San Angelo and you have a parking lot associated with the building permit, we would do a site plan review. If you're just having a standalone parking lot, you would not have to do anything. And again, this brings up grading, drainage, and stormwater issues. So we are proposing a parking lot permit, and this would be where you have a standalone parking lot, maybe not on the same site, but within the minimum distance. You would go through a site plan review exactly as the way it is right now. Planning director or staff would review once it's been built to make sure that it's passable and drivable. And same if they're repainting it or reorienting. And if they're just painting it over, no. If they're reorienting or adding new spaces, yes. And so that's the new standards for parking. We don't currently have specifics. We just say that parking lot shall be maintained and paved. So part of this is to make it clear that they do have to stripe and they do have to pave it, and it would meet our paving standards. Parking location, currently if you have a standalone parking lot, or if you're off-site, you can, as long as you're within 400 feet through an agreement, you can meet your parking off-site. We've increased that to 500 feet. That's roughly the size of a city block, just to have a little bit more leeway to allow standalone. The only key factor here is it has to be in a zoning district intended to serve the use. So if you're in a residential neighborhood and you're abutting commercial, and the commercial wants to expand, they can't just put a parking lot over on an RS1 property. It has to be zoned for the use that it's intended for. Alternative parking, this is something we brought in a few years back that allows the planning director to authorize alternative parking. It only currently includes parking standards, so we've added stacking and loading. We've also allowed a developer agreement option. So often developers get very close to a final certificate of occupancy, and then they find out that they can't meet the parking and they're pressed for time. The development agreement option, on a case-by-case basis, if our planning director feels it's warranted, could allow a development agreement, possibly to defer certain improvements until down the road. They'd still have to provide the parking, but they may, again, it would just depend on what we're doing. Also, we'd allow up to 50% of the required parking to be on-street. Currently, right now, that's not an available option, but this would be part of an alternative parking plan. So if we know that downtown you don't have to provide any parking in the CBD. That wouldn't change. But there are some properties, Zone CG, for example, that have the angled parking right in the front. They could use a portion of that, up to 50% if they're, and again, we review that on a case-by-case. We also looked at minimum dimensions. The key here I'll just highlight is we currently don't have a standard for parallel or tandem parking, but a lot of developers just do it anyway. Whataburger on Sherwood's a good example where they meet their parking. Again, you're pressed for space. The only thing is we'd add, consistent with our sister cities, an extra 4 feet of maneuvering. So a parking maneuvering space would be, tandem space would be 9 by 23 instead of 9 by 18. That would give a little bit of wiggle room. I'm not going to go over all of this, but just to highlight, we looked at design and maintenance as well. All it says right now is only required parking shall be paved. Under the new standard, all parking that's provided shall be paved. Again, for the same reasons we mentioned earlier about drainage and stormwater. No changes in terms of the paving standards. There's still 4 possibilities in the zoning ordinance: hot mix, 2-course concrete, or pavers, or other material accepted by the city, so that would not change. All we've stated here is basically we're just spelling out what's already not spelled out from before. So yes, it shouldn't have potholes. No, it shouldn't have debris or refuse on it. We've also added, if the developer chooses to light their parking lot, that parking is adequately lit and shielded from neighboring properties. A lot of the commercial sites, again, where you're butting up right against residential, this will guarantee that they shield it, but we will not require anyone to put any lighting in unless it was, say, part of a PD. This would just protect the residents nearby. Quickly, I've handed out the new changes to the parking table. We did extensive site work. I had gone out and looked at our sister cities. I also looked at the current sites at peak times, whether it's AM or PM or at lunchtime for restaurants or Saturday nights, things like that, hotels on Sunday morning with the highest volume on Saturday night. And so what we found in conclusion is most of the current standards either meet or should be coming down. So furniture stores, for example, you probably go by Furniture Row or some of those other furniture properties, they've got way too much parking requirement that they don't actually need. Now, the advantage of all of this is that if the developer chooses to put in more, they still could. So all of the uses that we're proposing that actually would have to provide more parking from our research, the development industry is already doing that. So uses with no change, single family and two family dwellings will still be 2 spaces, so no change there. We've already looked at schools. Uses decreasing, so multifamily apartments, if you're more than 2 bedrooms, so 3 or more, we would just use the 2-bedroom standard, 1.75. You know, and again, a lot of the students do drive, but some of them don't, and we didn't find that once you go above 3 bedrooms, it really wouldn't make too much of a difference. Again, if the apartment complex in question wants to provide more parking, they could. A significant change I mentioned was furniture stores, banks as well. Even at peak times, a lot of people use the drive-through queue, or again, they do provide enough parking. So the parking has gone down for a lot of these uses. Furniture stores, home appliance stores, etc. Retail and grocery stores, we found that the 1 per 200 standard actually works pretty well. But if you're over a certain size, so like an HEB or something larger, again, the 1 per 300 is roughly what we calculated would work. And that's pretty much it. Some of the other parking uses that we recommended increasing, movie theaters and churches, for example. All of the sister cities use a 1 space for every 4 seats in the main sanctuary or in the main seating hall. For whatever reason, when maybe at that time it wasn't as in demand, we used a 1 per 10 standard, and that's too low. From our research, most of the churches and the 2 movie theaters in town are actually providing about 1 per 4, 1 per 5 already. So we had looked into that. So we would recommend, and that's only in the main sanctuary. We wouldn't be calculating office areas or Sunday schools or things like that. So it should come out about the same of what they're actually providing. And lastly, I talked earlier about restaurants. The current standard of 1 per 4 seats is too low in most cases. The other problem is their seating arrangements often change. So consistent with some of our sister cities, we've proposed changing that to 1 per 100 square feet. And again, most of the restaurants in town are already doing that. The only addition we've got is mostly for bars. This applies if you've got outdoor seating or entertainment floor areas that packs them in, like a Fiddle Strings, for example, on a weekend. They should provide enough parking for those uses as well. And then finally, vehicle stacking. Again, not too many changes. We've essentially just added a few more types of vehicle stacking that could be provided. So there's nothing in here. Again, when this was written, maybe drive-through pharmacies weren't as popular, so we've just stated that clearly in there, as well as the different car wash types. This concludes staff's presentation. Any questions or comments?
Like a lot of work. Appreciate you guys taking the time to go through it. That's an awful lot to absorb. Does anyone have questions for Jeff?
So City Council would have final authority. Is it just 1 reading or 2?
It'd be 2 readings.
Readings for that?
Anyone else have questions for Jeff? All right, we're going to open it up for public comment. If you guys wish to speak on this, please state your name.
Good morning, Russell with SKG Engineering. Myself and Mr. Eustace were doing rock, scissors, paper to see who would come up first, so I lost. We believe this is a great start for looking at the parking and some good change in there. There are a few things that we see that we have concern with. So I guess I would ask any of you, would you sign or would you advise a client to sign a document that would have some verbiage in it that would say, to the satisfaction of the buyer, or as other information may be required by the buyer? Or
is there a specific area with
I'll dive into those, but I just kind of really wanted to make the point that there's some verbiage in here that is super open-ended and a very big concern that I can get into and address. So yes, let's start with, I guess it's page 2 of 2, section C, parking lot permit. C2. To the satisfaction of the building official and city engineer. And then
Hey,
2E.
wait, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. I want to make sure I find exactly where this is. So I'm on page 2, parking lot permit, section C.
Yes, sir. And then subsection 2.
Subsection 2.
The second line of that.
There we go. So the parking lot permit shall be reviewed and approved by the planning director and to the satisfaction of the building official and city engineer. And it's the second part of that sentence that you're concerned about?
Yes.
And to the satisfaction of the building official and city engineer?
Yes.
Okay.
To me, if they meet the requirements of whatever ordinances and conditions are out there, that part of the sentence doesn't need to be there.
Okay.
Russell, I'd like to address your question.
Sure.
If it'll help. That statement is really just a spelling out of the current process now. And so essentially the only difference here with a parking lot permit is if you have a standalone parking lot. And so this, basically the process would be the same as a site plan review right now where the parking lot is connected to a building permit. This is just to require, if you have a standalone lot that's not connected to a permit, that there's a review process. But from our discussions together as our different departments, this would essentially be the same process. They'd submit a site plan, this would just be called a parking lot permit. The site plan would show the grading and drainage and the parking spaces, and planning and engineering.
So the reason you guys added that language is because
right now
you may not have to apply for a building permit if you're doing parking lot work.
That's correct.
And if I could add, that is not intended to grant any discretionary authority to the planning director, building official, or city engineer. It's what that's intended to say is those three people have to review it in order to ensure compliance basically with these standards. And maybe any other applicable standards like drainage, for example, for the city engineer.
So if you're not required to apply for a building permit, there could be scenarios where there's a parking lot permit that would have to be filed for work that's being done. But it wouldn't necessarily go through the same process as a building permit would. And you're trying to have it where it does that. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. It's intended to be a simplified, shorter review process. And all this number 2 is saying is that those three individuals would review it. I mean, if there's a way we could word that to address Russell's concern, as I understand it, you're suggesting that maybe that gives those three individuals some sort of discretionary authority to approve it or not.
Too broad is what
Really,
you're
all it's
concerned about.
intended to do is say those are the people who review it per the standards in the ordinance.
Right.
It doesn't give them any authority to say, well, I just don't like it, or anything like that.
The sentence below that just says the parking lot permit shall include at a minimum. So really, to me, that's what you've got to. Once you satisfy those, then you've satisfied the conditions of the permit.
Well, and the reason we include H, which I'm guessing was the other piece you had a little bit of a concern with, that's not uncommon to have in ordinances to say other information is maybe required. In fact, in some cases, we don't list, A through G. We just say on an application provided by the city. And the reason for that is there may be something that we didn't list in A through G, that there's actually a requirement somewhere in here that says you have to do it. We don't want someone to say, well, I don't have to provide that because it's not listed on A through G. That just gives us the ability to say, well, to show you meet XYZ standard on this other page, we need you to provide some other document, some other drawing, or something like that. It's really, again, that's not intended to be an open-ended, provide your birth certificate or, something completely unrelated. And if, for both of those, if there are ways that you might suggest we reword that to make that more clear, we're fine with that. But that's really the intent.
Because the other information, you know, it could be, well, we want a landscape plan. Well, we don't have a landscape ordinance, but it could become one. I'm not saying it would, but it could be with that discretion. So if we can define that, maybe we work on some verbiage together. Absolutely, we're not opposed to the permit. We're just kind of opposed to some of the vague open-endedness of that.
How many other areas do you have that you're concerned about, Russell?
Not many.
Okay.
Not
so
many.
If it's not many, I'd like to try to address these collectively, and if we can incorporate the changes into what's being proposed, maybe try to move forward with this. Is that okay with you guys?
I'll just defer to you on whether you want to take them one by one. I actually have a suggestion to fix these, but if we want to wait and hear all of Russell's comments or come back.
I think we should just, if it's not a lot, let's try to tackle it.
I think for both of these, adding after the word city engineer and then adding at the end of H, something like to ensure compliance with the standards of this section or other city ordinances. That way the discretion of the planning director, building official, or city engineer shall be reviewed and approved to ensure compliance with this section or other city ordinances.
What if we just struck and to the satisfaction of in that section 2? So reviewed and approved by the planning director, building official, and city engineer.
Yes.
Would that be okay with you?
That's what I had.
I'm
yes,
okay
sir.
with that too, yeah.
All right, so just strike and to the satisfaction of.
And speaking as a developer, I've had to go to the city, and in trying to get a building permit, I've had to add on, not with anybody that's currently in here, but there was a time when every time I went in there, they would say, now you need this, and now you need this, and now you need this. And so it needs to be black and white and this other information as may be required by the city, because you start playing add-on, and it drives a developer crazy. And then you don't get it. Then when time is of the essence, you don't get it before the next commission. You know, and so I would say that any vagueness needs to be scratched out. What a developer wants is just black and white bullet list. Let me do this, 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 and this, and let me go on my way. Because when you got to keep going down and say, well, I got to talk to my boss, or I got to do this, or I got to, it's terribly frustrating. So on H, I would say completely scratch that. Or in place of that, put, I'd just say scratch it.
What would be wrong with scratching it?
Well, the parking ordinance is not necessarily standalone. Like if you meet striping and paving and all of that, you're entitled to the permit. It can also involve other ordinances that come into play. And I'm thinking mainly of drainage. And
Sure.
so if their plan may qualify for a parking lot, but because of the impervious surface added, it's going to pull in the drainage, and the city engineer is going to have to approve a drainage plan. So there's other things like that to say that you need to comply with all city ordinances that come into play. And that's the reason for these reviews. It's the same as like a plat review. Fire marshal, engineer, all of these things. So this is not isolated on an island all by itself, where if you meet A, B, and C, you just get to do it. You still have to comply with all city ordinances, whatever they are.
Okay, your example, I was just going
ADA isn't in here. Well, there might, their fire code is in here, but it's not spelled out. So depending on the layout, the plot plan, the parking lot, where is your no parking going to be? How wide are your lanes going to have to be? There's a lot of things involved So, if you spell this out ironclad too narrowly, you're going to end up with a whole lot of noncompliance and a whole lot of issues.
So instead of saying may be required by the city, could we say something like may be necessary to ensure compliance with the city ordinances? Would that be okay with you guys?
Because you have to comply with them anyway.
Exactly.
You know, it's not like you can't.
Right.
You know, they're there, whether you say to or not, they're there. You know, kind of like item E, all drainage, all grading, drainage, and stormwater requirements of the city engineer. Well, I don't think it should be of the city engineer. It should be of the city or
right
the ordinances. Nothing against the city engineer. Just let's not make it
It's not one
specific.
person. Yeah,
Right.
it's the ordinances.
It's the ordinances.
Okay. What else you got?
What was the actual change on H?
Yeah, I guess how are we changing H?
Other information as may be necessary to ensure compliance with city ordinances.
Good with me, if it's good with you guys.
And then I guess on E, strike or
Engineer.
just stop of the city engineer, because that's a definitive
Just take the.
Just strike engineer.
of the city engineer.
Did you say of the city?
Just gonna say of the city instead of the city engineer.
Or just say all grading, drainage, and stormwater requirements.
Requirements.
Period.
Okay.
I guess you could say of the city, I guess it's inferred, but either way, yes.
Okay.
And then jump to page 8. What is now G4. In Jeff's presentation, he spoke about churches and the requirement that it's 1 per 4 for the sanctuary, and that you then wouldn't count like the church offices. But this item 4, the way I was reading it, would be contradictory to what Jeff was saying, to where they could make you park it for every individual use.
I think the distinction there is what is a principal use, and the church is the principal use. So church Sunday school rooms or church fellowship halls or church whatever else would all be part of that principal use. Now, if the church leased out space for, say, a real estate office or a coffee shop or something like that, then that separate principal use would have its own parking requirement. But any use associated with the church itself, the principal use is the church, and the way the calculation is listed in the table previously is for the sanctuary. Does that make sense?
So should we add of the various principal uses or something to?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is 4 says in the case of multiple principal uses located on a lot. For a church, there's only one principal use.
Okay.
All of those other things are considered accessory to the church use.
Okay, great, thank you. Page 9, H4. Another one, where deemed necessary by the planning director. And then even item 2, satisfaction of the city engineer.
And Russell, you're talking about number 2. That has been amended, and I've handed those out today. That it's the planning director or designee that would review the maintenance of the parking lots, not the city engineer.
We could,
Yeah, I
I
don't
mean,
know
we
how.
could take those out. The intention was to be clear on who had that authority.
Sure.
I mean, if we took it out, the only issue is there may be a question when we go to enforce this, who gets to say, but it's, I mean, in some ways, that's the case with anything in here.
And that one, boy, that would be a gray area to try to go enforce that one. Oh, you have some potholes, and you say, well, go drive down a city street, and you want to compare potholes. I don't have issues with that one, but that one may be a challenge at some future to deal with. So,
And if anyone has suggestions on that one, the intent there is we receive complaints about parking lots being impassable. Right now, we have no ability to enforce anything. In fact, there's a question of whether or not a new business is going into an old building. Do we have any authority to make them repave the parking lot if it's in horrible condition? And this is intended to give some authority to say, if it's so bad, we can make you repave it. Understanding that this is not entirely, I mean, there's really not a good standard to say,
Yeah.
okay, if there's a pothole that's at least this deep or this many, this much circumference or, and so this is one that there's going to be some judgment calls. I'll tell you, our intention here is to only exercise this authority in the worst circumstances, but we've had developments come in where the parking lot was, you couldn't really tell it was asphalt at one point, and there was still some question whether or not we could make them do anything to improve it.
So wouldn't the customer drive that decision on that business? Right? So if I want to frequent a business, but I know that it's going to be worse than driving one of our streets, I would probably not frequent that business, right? Before we regulate somebody's parking lot, I think that's something that could be self-regulated, right? I mean, to me, it seems like if I'm going to open a business and I'm going to be welcoming of people to spend money on my establishment, I'm going to give them a pretty decent place to drive and park, right? Without having to step into 7 inches of water or something like that.
I think at a minimum, there should be a life safety factor that maybe, so long as it's
There,
by the fire
I was
department
gonna say,
standard.
I feel like we have to have some sort of minimum standard for improvements that we try to maintain from a compliance standpoint.
I guess if you, really, I could see fire lanes being something that the fire marshal probably has the authority to
If
make
people
them.
are losing their bumpers driving through the parking lot, it'd be great for the city to maybe have the authority to do something about it. And we don't have, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And
Or
I
in
think
front of HEB,
what
you
that
can
comes down to is just a philosophical question.
It's very subjective.
Is that something that we think the city should be involved in, or should we just let the market decide? And if somebody wants to have a potholed parking lot, we're okay with that. We've recommended including some standard that would allow us to basically force someone to repave their parking lot.
And so this goes into the broader discussion about like weeds on someone's home. If it's, we've got a standard that says if they're 12 or 18 inches tall, then the city's going to come out and maybe write a fine for them to mow their lawn. I kind of feel like this falls in that same category. If your parking lot's in such bad shape that people are getting flat tires or losing car parts, it'd be nice for the city to be able to go in and say, you need to do something about it.
We have some very wise council members. This will be a good one to just let them make the decision on.
Yes, sir.
From the legal perspective, it would be a health and safety standard.
Yes.
For instance, if there were fire lanes that were supposed to be marked and they're so worn off,
Right.
and people are not then complying with it, that's a health and safety standard.
It is.
And that's currently, the
So-
fire marshal can make people go stripe
Well,
that.
So, it's the same thing as, well, we couldn't have any codes inspectors because it's all their opinions. Well, they're still governed by the codes and a health and safety reason. And if they're arbitrary, there are there's remedies that are available if the property owner doesn't, agree. So, there needs to be some provision there, to permit like continued compliance. It's in there new 10 years later,
Yes.
may be totally out of compliance. So that's the reason for that. in your thought process, but there'd have to be a showing of a health and safety issue to, comply, for a property owner to be required to do something.
And if I could add a suggestion on 4, because I think if you recall Jeff's presentation, number 4, I think where we ended with the discussion, which is not actually what is written here, I would suggest changing that to say parking lot lighting if provided, and then skip all the way down to shall be fully shielded and not create spillover glare. And get rid of that may be required.
You'll be the parking lot lighting police, I guess. That'd be one of those things that, if it's left there, that the planning director could, hey, Connolly, you gotta now light your parking lot. So we agree with that.
I'm sorry, I totally missed that. Or you're on item 4?
Yeah, if we changed item 4 to say parking lot lighting, if provided, shall be fully shielded and not create spillover glare. I think that's the way Jeff presented it in the presentation, but that's not exactly how it's worded. We reworded this 2 or 3 times, and I think that simplification of it would address Russell's concern and still be what we were asking for.
Is that good with you, Russell?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay.
Page 12.
I want to go back to item
question.
2. So
Number
can we
2.
add something that says like, so that health and safety are maintained or something like that? To maintain public health and safety? If that's the main concern, or if that's our,
So my question also on this, because it's parking facilities, are we also including driveways to homes? And if so, there are many homes that have crushed granite now instead of a paved surface. Are you saying that they would have to go in and pave their driveway?
Well, no, pre-existing driveways would be exempt, and in many cases, we allow gravel or caliche or something other than, asphalt or pavement. So if that's what they've got today, I guess as written, that would apply to residential. So we could exempt residential from this if that's your concern. But again, just because they have a gravel parking driveway wouldn't necessarily put them in violation of this. Now, if it was gravel and also had deep holes and ruts and was not drivable or passable, then perhaps. But I think largely our intent there was for non-residential development. But that's really up to you all if you would want to exempt single family from that.
I was going to say, Commissioner Jackson, there is also an administrative variance process. So if you're in a rustic or recreational area, say like Lake Nasworthy, or you're more rural, there is an option, again, on a case-by-case, but where they could use a caliche driveway, or at least a portion, maybe have their parking spaces under their carport paved, but then from that point to the street, possibly allowing a caliche or an all-weather surface.
Did everyone hear that? Do you mind repeating it, Jeff? I don't think all the commissioners heard it.
So our current zoning ordinance allows in a rustic or recreational area where there's proliferation, say the majority of driveways are already caliche or an all-weather surface, of allowing an administrative variance already. There's a process for allowing an all-weather surface or to keep those driveways all-weather.
all right, Russell, you got anything else?
Page 12, item D3.
D3. The only red section on this entire page, Russell.
Yes, sir. And I found it.
All right.
I don't know if loading space is a big aesthetic issue, concern. We've recently just did a commercial site that had streets on all 4 sides. And I don't know how, other than building some sort of special enclosed loading area, you know, we'd have to be having some fence around some loading area in the back of this facility based on this screening wall. I'd really like to see it struck, removed, whatever the proper verbiage is there. You know, it just, I just don't know what the concern is, or why this is being added in there.
Don't we already have that in place where if it's a certain distance from a residential area, it has to have a screen or fence?
If you have commercial next to
Commercial.
residential,
Right.
then
I
there's
don't know
certain
who else would have
requirements.
loading spaces if it were not commercial.
It's the commercial is required, or the loading space is required at what, over 20,000 square feet size?
That's correct.
So, you know, small commercial doesn't have this. It'll be those over the 20,000 square feet that you'll have these loading spaces. So some of these hotels, they have to have a loading space. And some of them, it's just kind of right there in the front of it, so.
We're just talking about within 50 feet of a residential use, right?
Well, or facing a street.
Or zoning district boundary.
Well, all loading spaces facing a street.
Okay.
So.
And I think the idea here is, well, I think the one issue that's not addressed in our current ordinances is that requirement that says commercial adjacent to residential has to screen from the residential does not apply if the residential is across the street. So for example, if there's a grocery store that their backside backs up to a residential area across the street, they would not have to screen from that residential area. So you might have the truck dock loading area, trash bins, all the noise and everything associated with that could be right what you see out your front door if there's homes across the street from the backside of a commercial type use. That's really what this is intended to address.
So you're talking about an alley?
It might not be an alley. It might. I don't think the example I'm thinking of is the new HEB. I don't think their loading is actually on the Dexter side of that building. But if just imagine if it was their home. I think that's the street name, Dexter. Drexler. Yeah, Drexel. And so if that HEB, if their loading had been on that Drexel side of the grocery store, those homes that are right across the street, there was no requirement for any screening of those areas.
So it's really only in residential applications. Is that?
It's where the commercial and their loading space
is proximal to residential.
Right. And like you said, the commercial screening would already be required if it just literally backed up to residential. It's only where that residential is across a street that this would come into play.
I don't feel we'd be opposed to screening when there's residential across the street. I can just think there's a new Dollar Tree going in there near Ben Ficklin, kind of close to the South Walmart, and they have street on all four sides. So all loading spaces facing a street, well, they have streets on all four sides, so they have to have pretty much a gated loading area in there. So that may be a challenge, but you know, between a residential use, now there again, or zoning district. So I don't know how, you know, there's a school across the street, but it's zoned, it's in an RS1 zoning, but it's not. So would they need to screen from a school if it's in a residential zoning district?
Or if you have it that broad, does it trip if your neighborhood commercial abutting general commercial? Does that because it's on the zoning district boundary? Does that?
Maybe a loading zone facing a street with residential adjacent, maybe? Not necessarily 50 feet, but just adjacent.
To answer your question, that's intended to mean to any residential use or residential zoning district boundary,
Okay,
not any zoning district boundary.
right. It's written as any though, right?
It could be read either way. The residential modifies both the word use and zoning district boundary.
Okay,
But we could add residential in there just to make it crystal
absolutely.
clear.
I think we should. Any residential use or residential zoning district boundary. So what do we do about the street facing? This is really only residential applications that we're talking about.
Say all loading spaces facing a street and located instead of or? Because the or gives you, could go either way. So if you say and, that says you got to have both conditions. And that's what I was hearing being said.
Because the other condition is already addressed in some other part of our ordinance, right?
Yeah, so I think just changing the or to and
Gets us there.
probably gets us there.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you,
Jeff?
Russell. Thanks for taking the time to go through it in that detail.
Also, we have 2 3s on item D. If you wanted, that second one should be a 2.
Oh,
Didn't
thank you.
change. Mhm.
I'll fix that. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Steve Eustace, and I wished I'd have won the rock, paper, scissors because I was just going to ask that we have the chance to sit down with staff and table this and make some changes. Because I think we've made several changes here today that I'm not 100% sure what we've done. But because I didn't get a chance to read this over the weekend like Russell evidently did. So we fixed. Okay, I'm not sure I
Here are
understand.
the changes that we've discussed. So page 2, C, 2. We struck and to the satisfaction of out of that second line.
Okay.
Also strike and approved on the first line. Shall be reviewed by the planning director, building official, and city engineer.
I think we need approved in there. Even if we strike it, that's assumed. I mean, somebody has to approve the application.
Oh, you can just review and not make any comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you strike and approved, somebody could read that to mean we review it, but can't make them do anything different if we don't have the approval authority.
And then on item H, other information as may be required to comply with city ordinances. Is what I wrote down.
I think where I have it, we ended up was other information as may be necessary.
Other information as may be
to ensure
necessary. I have
compliance
that
with
right.
city ordinances.
Yeah. Then I jumped back. Page 9. H1. You had a note about to the satisfaction of the appropriate city official. Do we want to designate someone? Is your concern enforcement if we don't designate someone? John?
I don't have a concern with that. I think the reason we use that language there is because number 1 includes a lot of different things. So depending on which item in one we're talking about, that person may be the planning director, it may be the fire marshal, and so there are multiple people that may look at, those different standards within H1.
Steve, did you have a question on number 1?
I circled that.
Right.
I had to let Russell comment on that. That was kind of what he covered, so. councils.
I think we're good with that one because it's kind of asking about a variance to allow an all-weather surface in lieu of paved to the satisfaction of the appropriate. So I think
That's okay.
when you're asking for a variance or something different, it's okay to say to the satisfaction of those people in that specific case.
Perfect. Thank you. So item 2, we're adding something about maintaining public health and safety.
Okay, can you read number 2 as you're amending it, please?
I would, unless somebody has a better suggestion, I would just add to maintain public health and safety to the very end of it.
That's what I had done.
Do you want me to ask questions right now on
Sure.
these clarifications? So I've got a lot of parking lots, and when you get a pothole in the parking lot, that's pretty easy fix. You get a hot mix out there and you fill it up, pat it down. But I've also got parking lots that are alligatoring all over, and there's no question they're not good. But I'm telling you, if you've ever had to replace a parking lot, they're going to tell you we're going to have to go all the way down to the base. I mean, so I don't know, what is a health and safety issue? Is it just a pothole?
That's the conversation we just had. And a parking lot's very expensive.
Oh.
It makes or breaks something.
You get some buildings that someone may want to buy on North Chadbourne or something where they could really probably buy this building for 40 or 50 grand and fix it up. And they've got an alligator parking lot. It's one thing to fill a few potholes, but if you have to replace that parking lot down to the base, you could be looking at, what, $150,000 to $200,000.
It's prohibitive.
It's prohibitive. That's exactly right.
And I think our intent is not to, if it's like an alligator type surface, as long as it's passable and drivable, then you're
and
still
that's why
good.
I thought
It
public
doesn't
health
mean
and
you have to
safety
keep
was-
it.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
really.
It doesn't have to be as new. It's just, it's one of those things you kind of know it when you see it. If a parking lot is so bad that people want to avoid driving on it, is really the kind of the standard we're talking about.
Can we add passable and drivable?
Well, that's what's in there, and one of my suggestions might be to just remove free and clear of debris, refuse, and potholes, because that seems to be part of the hang-up here, and just say, shall be passable and drivable.
Okay.
Which is already in there.
Free and clear of debris, refuse, and potholes. Strike that.
Because I don't think the intention there is if
Okay,
there's
so
one
what are we
pothole,
striking?
then all of a sudden you're in violation.
So on line 2, free and clear of debris, refuse, and potholes. Strike that.
And again, what's the definition of maintain public health and safety?
As with any ordinance, that ultimately comes down to the code enforcement official, and ultimately, if somebody ends up getting a citation for not fixing their parking lot, it comes down to the judge or a jury deciding what, it comes down to what a reasonable person thinks, and that's the case with so many of our ordinances, that I guess I don't have a problem with that interpretation involved in this, because ultimately, not only does staff have to be able to justify it to our bosses, ultimately, if we end up writing a citation, it has to be a judge or a jury that says, yeah, that's reasonable. And it's not uncommon for the judge to say, hey, you guys overstepped. That doesn't meet this standard. So that's one of the reasons we work very hard to avoid getting to that point with issues like this. So I think we're going to err on the side of, I think we would take every one of you out there on the side, and all of you would say, yeah, that's clearly not drivable, before we would actually pursue enforcement on something like this section.
What's the next change that we know we've made?
Number 4.
Number 4, I have a note that just says if provided for the lighting.
I think it would read, 4 would read, parking lot lighting, if provided, shall be fully shielded. So most of the first 2 lines that are currently in there would be stricken.
particular. So is there hours that are, if you put up lighting, is it the owner's discretion on when the lights are on?
I believe so, under our current.
So you can shut them off when the store closes?
Yes, sir. You don't have to, yeah. I think just because you have parking lot lights doesn't mean you have to turn them on.
Now, that's the
I
question.
think what he's trying to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the way this was originally worded, and we've reworded it a couple of times, was to require parking lot lighting, or at least have situations where we could require it. What I'm proposing is striking that, but if that's a concern, many cities do require parking lots to have a minimum amount of lighting for health and safety. But this would say an HEB, if they didn't want to provide lighting, they didn't have to. And
If the business is closed and a parking lot shouldn't be used, why would you need lighting?
I would say, I bet if we asked the police department, they would say
They would like some lighting.
having it always lit up is probably a good idea.
Yeah, and I think that in large stores like an HEB, they know internally what their liability is for safety of people that are on their property. But for small businesses, I think it needs to be their discretion of what they do.
And
I mean, as
the way
far
this
as
is-
when lights are on or off.
the way this is reading now, this is really only addressing that the lighting needs to be shielded and not spillover glare onto adjacent property.
Okay, so
If there's lighting, it just needs to be basically installed properly, I think is what.
Correct.
we're
And to
trying
go back to
address
that
here.
HEB example, they were actually subject to a plan development, but that was a requirement we made of them to protect the people in the homes across Drexel. And that's the kind of circumstance this is intended to address.
So my next comment would be from a personal standpoint, not defending businesses' rights to. I think lights should go downward and not pollute the sky. Have y'all?
That's what this does.
But it says glare onto adjacent properties or streets.
Well, and the term fully shielded in the lighting industry has
Okay,
a
all
definite
right.
meaning, and that's shielded to direct it downward.
All right.
Okay, the only other place I have changes that we discussed was on page 12, D3. And the two changes I noted, all loading spaces facing a street, strike or and put and, located closer than 50 feet to a residential use, or add residential zoning district boundary.
So what, and,
So, and replaces or in the first line,
yes,
and add residential in front of zoning district boundary on line 2.
okay, and if I had more time to go through I want to, on the comments on the second page where the staff comments are, I'm not sure I fully understand about when you expand a building. Okay, so in the middle of the first bullet point, says this could allow buildings with large footprints to expand under 25% without having to provide new parking. But then a few lines down, it says, but expansions less than 25% provide additional parking for only the expansion. So when you expand less than 25%, do you have to add any new parking? Or you don't have to add any new parking?
Yes, you would have to add parking, but only for the expansion. So if there's a use today that's substandard and doesn't have enough parking under our ordinance, if they're expanding less than 25%, they wouldn't have to bring the whole parking lot up to standard for the whole building, but they would have to provide enough additional spaces that the expansion would trigger. Does that make sense?
Well, you'd add it to if you expanded 15%, then do you look at the whole building and 115% of what the, that's now the square footage, you have to comply with that many parking spaces?
No, so if the expansion is, say, 1,000 square feet, and that triggers, say, 4 parking spaces, you would only have to provide the 4 new spaces. You wouldn't have to bring the existing building up to compliance with parking, just for the expansion area.
You may be in a scenario where it might be to your benefit to bring up the old and say, I had 20 spaces before when I only needed 15, and now I need 19. So I'm
I've
still
already
good
got
with
it.
the 20 I've got.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I understand. I mean, I know what stacking is. When you leave a parking lot and you can't get on the street because you got stacking. But is stacking in parking lot just you'd have to move one car before you could get out? Is that what stacking means in the parking lot rules?
Stacking most of the cases would apply to drive-throughs, for example. So you have your parking spaces, and then your stacking would be, for example, the amount of vehicles that have to idle between, say, the entry and the pickup window. So say it's McDonald's. When you go to pay for your food, it's usually four car lengths. So if a parking space is 9 by 18, a stacking space is the same. It would be having 4 of those 9 by 18 spaces in a straight line between where you go to pay and then where you pick up your food.
So it's 4, that by definition, it's 4 cars in a drive-in?
It is now, yes. And it depends. If you want, we can go back to that table. Each different type of use has a different stacking requirement.
I just have one more, so. And where do you see that, Jeff?
It goes around to the,
So for example, Steve, I put it on the screen. Let's say you have a drive-through bank or a pharmacy. What that means is that you'd have to have at least enough space, a stacking lane, before you go to pick up your before you go to your ATM machine or your pharmacy window. You'd have to have at least 4 cars that could idle before that in a stacking lane.
You can't have more than 4 that stop someone else from backing out of their parking place.
Correct.
Okay, that's good enough for me. Just one other, it sounds real,
By like 90.
Right. Now go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, that's all right. We're just having a dialogue here. So in furniture stores, for example, decreasing the amount of parking required. I don't think there's any doubt if you drive by any furniture store, they got way too much parking. What my fear is that when that furniture store goes out of business, you ain't got enough parking to convert that building to something different.
Yeah, and that's something that we try to let developers know when they come in for a particular use, like a shopping center use, for example. We try to get them to think about what are all the different uses that could go in there, because some uses require fewer parking spaces, and we've had that similar issue with other types of uses. So again, this doesn't prevent a developer or property owner from putting in more spaces than we require. Right. This is just what is the minimum amount that we would require. But that is something a furniture store could shoot themselves in the foot if they provide the absolute minimum.
Well, and we don't want to create vacant buildings that don't have the ability to convert to something else. So,
and I think if a furniture store came in, we would let them know here's what's required. But if this building's ever used for something else, you may want to provide this many to be sure that you meet the normal retail standard.
I'm just wondering if we should keep it as it is with the opportunity to request less, so that we take a more proactive. I mean, because a lot of architects and people, they just get on the website and figure out the rules and draw their plans. They don't come sit down with y'all and I mean, some do. I don't know. I'm just, I don't want to create buildings that we can't sell.
Steve, I just want to add something quick. The Furniture Row is a good example because that was one of the sites that I investigated when I did the research. I think like a lot of these uses, especially where we're proposing an increase, that's a good example where I think the developer provided more than needed in the hopes that they would actually have more customers. But this way, we're not forcing them to do it. So like you say, it's good if they come in to get a permit that we advise them, hey, if this furniture store ever went away and you converted it into a retail, which is double or triple that, 1 per 200, you probably want to make sure. But this way, the city's not being too aggressive and saying, well, you have to do this, especially if you don't actually have those needs. If you think you're going to have those needs, then definitely, pave more parking. But I had gone out that particular site and some of the others, even on Saturday at 1 o'clock, and I don't want to say all the time because it could be a rush at some time of the year or a special event, but those were the uses we thought were going to be well under what they would need to do. But I understand where you're coming from as well.
The original Ashley's, it's a church now. So they needed, fortunately that lot they had an abundance of parking there. So I think that's probably all of my comments.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Please come forward. All right, I'm going to close public comment. Anyone else have questions, or do we have a motion?
I just have a comment. I also felt the same as Mr. Eustace in that I didn't feel like I had enough time to diligently go over all of the changes. We've hit some high spots here, the ones that they have brought out, but I don't know that I've actually had the opportunity or taken the opportunity to go through this all the way through to make an informed decision. So I am not opposed to tabling it.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion to table it?
Yes.
Okay.
I second the motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Okay. That didn't pass. So anyone else want to make a motion?
I move that we accept these as presented and as changed.
I think we've gone over them sufficiently that from the record, if the motion is just to approve as amended during the discussion.
Do that, because I don't want to go through all that again
We have-
for the third, fourth time, but
Okay.
I feel comfortable with the changes we've made, and so I'd like to move forward, so I move that we accept it with the changes made.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the changes in the parking ordinance with the discussions that we had with Mr. Gully and Mr. Eustace primarily as we went through and reviewed the ordinance. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
I'm going to oppose also.
All right, so 3-2. I lost mine. There we go.
And I want to say I oppose only because I think that parking is quintessential to business, and it's real important, and I think that everybody needs to read and understand completely what they're approving.
I do too.
Okay. The next item is the discussion regarding changes to the bylaws of the Planning Commission by the City of San Angelo.
So our last item today, Jeff Fisher again. This is just a discussion item today, so we wanted all of your input on our revisions to our Planning Commission bylaws. Back in October, City Council approved revisions to Article 2.07 for boards, committees, and commissions. What that did is it created, as well as some general provisions and standards for very specific boards like Planning Commission, specific standards and requirements in addition to our bylaws. And so one of the mandates of council was that to strike out any duplicates that are already in the current Planning Commission bylaws. It also allowed us an opportunity to add a couple new sections that we felt were important for you all. And so essentially this would be a discussion item if you all were in agreement or you wanted to make any changes. We would bring this back in at the March Planning Commission, and this would have to go straight to City Council, as we had 6 months essentially to make these changes, and other boards are doing the same. So in general, the only additions that we've added that were not already in the new 207 is a new Section 11 Code of Ethics, and this is the American Planning Association ethical standard. So there's already in the City Code of Ordinances, when you all get your welcome package as planning commissioners, a code of ethics that city council members and commissioners have to follow. This would just include the APA ethical standards in planning as well. It's, again, some of the general statements. Again, you all do this already. And secondly, the current bylaws talk about deadlines for new applications, that you have to have your application in within 21 days before. That doesn't always give staff time when we have new cases to prepare the notices, circulate things. So we've just tweaked that one section to say that application deadlines correlate with what's on our Planning Commission website schedule, which you all have. So that basically, that one's a cleanup item. The other two changes here, and there's a lot of other little minor, change a comma, a sentence. So the two main ones were term limits. So this is in Section 207. So you'd also, in addition to the changes we've made to the Planning Commission bylaws, you'd also be subject to 207 of the City Code, which talks about term limits. So in the future, you would have, instead of 2 terms at 3 years each, as I understand it, would be 3 terms at 2 years each per term. So anything where you're currently on schedule would be the same, but this would be in effect in the future. The other change that council made was attendance. Right now, we have an opportunity for excused absences. If for some reason it's an emergency versus just something where you just simply can't, or you're unavailable to attend. We are not proposing any excused absences, so that would go away. And 207 says that if you miss 2/3 of your meetings within a 12-month period, you would no longer be on the Planning Commission. So basically that would be 8 out of 12. So that concludes just a brief presentation. And again, this is just a discussion today, and we welcome your feedback.
Okay.
And Jeff, I think that's actually the opposite. You must attend 2/3 of the meetings.
Okay.
I believe.
Failure to attend at least 2/3 of the meetings.
Right, and that was the intent of council. There's been some boards and commissions, not so much with this one, but
Right.
others where council felt that if you're not able to attend at least that many of the meetings, then maybe somebody else would be better suited for that board or commission.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to move on to the director's report.
I'm sorry, did you guys take a vote on that?
Oh, do we need to?
Yes, if you could just approve it for the commission's benefit, and then we'll take it on to city council.
The notice that was required was 2 weeks prior before they could take action.
Yeah. The bylaws require that you see it for 2 weeks prior to making a, so today was just a discussion. We'll bring it back to you at the next meeting for the formal vote. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you. Thought I heard that right. All right, director's report.
I don't think I have anything to add. Well, I wanted to say, you may recall that we have some changes to the subdivision ordinance that are pending. You guys tabled them. We will be bringing those back at some point soon. We've had a couple of busy meetings, so we're trying to hold off until there's a meeting that's relatively light, which hopefully will be the next meeting. But at some point, we'll bring it back regardless.
Okay, and I know there's been a lot of work done on this. As you saw with the parking changes, I hope and encourage anyone in our community that has an interest to review these changes and come speak, because it's for all of our benefit. The sooner we could get those changes out to the community so that everyone could have an opportunity to review them ahead of the meeting, I think the better chance we have of having a productive meeting where we could actually move forward with it. And I know there's a lot of changes in the subdivision ordinance that are proposed, so if you guys could please help us get those distributed sooner than later so that folks can start looking at it, I would appreciate it. Sure. Okay. Future meeting agenda and announcements. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is tentatively scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. on Monday, March 18th, 2019. Council Chambers of McNeese Convention Center at 501 Rio Concho Drive. An adjournment. Do I have a motion?
Motion, yes, so moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.